Hello and welcome to Sleep and Learn, a new series from Study English. I'm Sophie, and tonight we're going to do something a little different. Instead of practicing conversation or learning vocabulary lists, we're simply going to tell a story, a real story, a fascinating one. And as you listen, whether you're lying in bed, closing your eyes, or just winding down after a long day, the English will wash over you gently. You don't need to concentrate hard. You don't need to take notes. Just listen. Let the words settle around you like a warm blanket. The story I want to tell you tonight is one of rivalry, ambition, betrayal, brilliant marketing, and 2 bottles of dark, fizzy liquid that, between them, shaped the modern world more than almost any other product in history. Tonight, we're talking about Coca-Cola and Pepsi, the Cola Wars. 130 years of competition between 2 companies that started small, thought big, and changed everything. Get comfortable. I'll begin at the very beginning. The year is 1886. The place is Atlanta, Georgia, a city still rebuilding itself after the devastation of the American Civil War. The air is warm and thick. The streets smell of horse and dust and the distant sweetness of industry. In a modest backyard on Marietta Street, a man named John Stiff Pemberton is stirring something in a large brass kettle over an open flame. Pemberton is 54 years old, a pharmacist, an amateur chemist, and a man with a serious problem. During the Civil War, he had been wounded, a saber slash across the chest at the Battle of Columbus. The wound healed, but the pain medication they gave him, morphine, did not leave so easily. By 1886, Pemberton was addicted, and he was desperately searching for a cure, not just for himself, but for others like him. At that time, a popular remedy in America was Vin Mariani, a wine infused with cocaine, invented by a French chemist named Angelo Mariani. It was advertised as a tonic for the mind and body, and it was enormously popular. Pope Leo XIII reportedly carried a flask of it with him at all times. Thomas Edison said it helped him stay awake to work. Ulysses Grant drank it while writing his memoirs as he was dying of cancer. Did you know Vin Mariani was so popular that Pope Leo XIII appeared on an advertising poster for it, a genuine endorsement from the head of the Catholic Church for a cocaine-laced wine tonic? Pemberton wanted to create something similar, a temperance drink, meaning it contained no alcohol but still had the stimulating properties of cocaine and another ingredient he was experimenting with, the cola nut, which contains caffeine. He mixed coca leaf extract, cola nut extract, sugar, essential oils, and other flavorings, and created a thick, sweet syrup. He brought it to a local pharmacy called Jacob's Pharmacy on Peachtree Street. At Jacob's, someone, nobody knows who, or whether it was intentional, mixed the syrup with carbonated water instead of plain water, and the person who drank it said it was delicious. Pemberton's bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, came up with the name. He suggested Coca-Cola, one ingredient from the coca leaf, one from the cola nut. And Robinson, who had beautiful handwriting, wrote the name in the elegant looping script that, with very minor changes, is still the Coca-Cola logo today. In its first year, 1886, Coca-Cola sold an average of 9 drinks per day. Total sales for the year came to $50. Pemberton spent $73 on advertising. He lost money. Did you know? John Pemberton never knew what he had created. He sold the rights to Coca-Cola piece by piece before his death in 1888, receiving only around $2,000 in total. The company he sold it to would eventually be worth hundreds of billions. Pemberton died in August 1888, broke, in pain, and unaware that the syrup he had stirred in his backyard kettle would become the most recognized product in human history. The man who bought most of Pemberton's share in Coca-Cola was a businessman named Asa Griggs Candler. Candler paid a total of around $2,300 for the complete rights to the formula. Where Pemberton was a dreamer and a chemist, Candler was a marketer and a builder. He understood something that Pemberton had not, that the product was almost secondary. What mattered was getting people to try it, and then getting them to try it again and again. Candler distributed coupons, among the first coupons ever used in American commerce, for a free glass of Coca-Cola. He sent the syrup to pharmacies across the country with free samples. He put the Coca-Cola logo on everything he could think of: calendars, clocks, serving trays, fans, lamps, ceramic urns, painted wall signs. By 1895, just 7 years after acquiring the formula, Candler announced that Coca-Cola was being drunk in every single state in America. It was an extraordinary achievement for an era without mass media, without television, without the internet, achieved purely through relentless, imaginative promotion. Did you know? Asa Candler was so secretive about the Coca-Cola formula that he refused to write the complete recipe down anywhere. He memorized it and shared it only verbally with extreme caution to the minimum number of people necessary. In 1899, 2 lawyers from Chattanooga, Tennessee, Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead, approached Candler with a proposal. They wanted to bottle Coca-Cola so people could buy it not just at soda fountains and pharmacies, but anywhere, at any time. Candler was not enthusiastic. He thought the bottling idea was impractical and perhaps a little beneath the dignity of his product. But he agreed, and he agreed for almost nothing. The contract he signed gave Thomas and Whitehead the right to bottle and sell Coca-Cola across most of the United States for a payment of $1. There is some debate about whether that dollar was ever actually paid. It was one of the most catastrophically undervalued contracts in business history. Within decades, the bottling business would be worth more than the syrup business many times over. Candler would later say, in a moment of painful understatement, that he had not perhaps fully considered all the implications of that agreement. While Coca-Cola was building its empire across America, a quiet pharmacist in New Bern, North Carolina, was experimenting with his own fizzy drink. His name was Caleb Bradham. In 1893, just 7 years after Coca-Cola was invented, Bradham created a drink he initially called Brad's Drink. It was a mixture of carbonated water, sugar, caramel, lemon oil, nutmeg, and a blend of other natural additives, combined with pepsin, a digestive enzyme, and cola nuts. Bradham renamed it Pepsi Cola in 1898. The name came from pepsin and the cola nuts. He registered the trademark in 1903 and began selling it commercially. For the first decade of the 20th century, Pepsi-Cola grew steadily. It was cheaper than Coca-Cola. Bradham positioned it deliberately as the drink for ordinary people. By 1910, there were Pepsi-Cola franchises in 24 states. And then the First World War arrived. Did you know Caleb Bradham was so convinced that sugar prices would continue rising after World War I that he stockpiled enormous quantities at high prices? When sugar prices collapsed instead, it bankrupted the company. Pepsi went bankrupt twice before 1930. Sugar prices, which had spiked dramatically during the war, collapsed in 1920. Bradham had gambled and lost. He had bought enormous reserves of sugar at inflated prices, expecting them to rise further. Instead, they fell off a cliff. Pepsi-Cola went bankrupt in 1923. Bradham sold the trademark to a candy manufacturer who also failed. Pepsi went bankrupt again in 1931. This time, it was bought by a businessman from North Carolina named Charles Guff, who was also the president of a candy company called Loft Incorporated. And it was Guff who would transform Pepsi from a struggling regional drink into a genuine national competitor. Guff had a personal grudge against Coca-Cola. He had asked Coke for a discount on syrup for his candy stores, and Ben refused. So he pulled Coca-Cola from all his Loft stores and replaced it with Pepsi. Then he invested in reformulating and relaunching Pepsi-Cola as a serious brand. His most brilliant decision came in 1933, during the depths of the Great Depression. Pepsi began selling its drink in 12-ounce bottles, double the size of Coca-Cola's 6-ounce bottle, for the same price of 5 cents. Pepsi's slogan became, "Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi is the drink for you." It worked. Sales exploded. Pepsi had found its identity, the drink that gave you more for less, the challenger's weapon against the established giant. At the heart of the Cola Wars, beneath all the advertising and marketing and corporate strategy, is a mystery. A genuine, unresolved, carefully protected mystery. The secret formula for Coca-Cola. Known internally as Merchandise 7X, the exact recipe for Coca-Cola's flavoring is one of the most closely guarded trade secrets in the world. Coca-Cola has always claimed that only 2 people at any given time know the complete formula, and that those 2 people are never permitted to travel on the same aeroplane together, in case of an accident. The written formula is said to be kept in a specially constructed vault at the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta. The vault is a physical structure you can visit and see, though obviously you cannot see inside it. Did you know? In 2006, a Coca-Cola employee tried to sell what she claimed was the secret formula to Pepsi. Pepsi immediately contacted the FBI and refused the offer. A Pepsi spokesperson said, "We only obtain cola through ethical channels." The employee was later convicted of theft. Whether the extreme secrecy around the formula is genuinely necessary, or whether it is itself a brilliant piece of marketing, a story that makes Coca-Cola seem more mysterious and precious, is a question that has never been definitively answered. What we do know is this: in 1985, Coca-Cola changed its formula. The product was relaunched as New Coke, sweeter, smoother, closer in taste to Pepsi, and the American public reacted as though something had been taken from them personally. Within 3 months, amid one of the greatest public relations disasters in corporate history, Coca-Cola brought back the original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke quietly disappeared. The episode taught the industry something important. A product can stop being just a product and become something else, something emotional, something tied to identity and memory and belonging. You don't just drink Coca-Cola, you belong to it. Through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Coca-Cola dominated the soft drink market so completely that Pepsi was sometimes referred to within the industry simply as the other one. Coke had the relationships. Coke had the history. Coke had the iconic bottle, the contour bottle, designed in 1915, instantly recognizable by its shape alone, even in the dark. But Pepsi had something Coke did not: nothing to lose. In 1963, Pepsi launched a campaign that would change American advertising forever. It was called the Pepsi Generation. The campaign was not about the drink, it was about the people who drink it. Young people, active, confident, forward-looking young Americans who were part of something new. The baby boomer generation was coming of age, and Pepsi positioned itself as their drink, the drink of youth, energy, and modernity. Coca-Cola, by contrast, was positioned, not entirely fairly, but effectively, as your parents' drink, the drink of the past, the establishment. Did you know? The Pepsi Generation campaign is widely studied in business schools as one of the first examples of demographic targeting in advertising, selling an identity rather than a product. The campaign worked. Pepsi began closing the gap, and Coca-Cola, watching its rival grow stronger, began to pay very close attention. The real war was about to begin. In 1975, Pepsi launched what became the single most famous marketing campaign in the history of the Cola Wars. It was called the Pepsi Challenge. The concept was simple and devastatingly effective. Pepsi set up tables in shopping malls across America. Shoppers were invited to take a blind taste test. They would drink from two unmarked cups, one containing Pepsi and one containing Coca-Cola, and say which they preferred. Pepsi won, consistently. In city after city, mall after mall, a majority of people who participated in the blind taste test said they preferred the taste of Pepsi. Coca-Cola dismissed the results. Their executives said the tests were rigged or poorly designed, or that people's preferences in a single sip were different from their preferences over a full can. They were not entirely wrong. There is genuine research suggesting that preferences in small quantities differ from preferences in larger ones. A sip of something sweeter is appealing. A whole can of something slightly less sweet is more satisfying over time. But the damage was done. Pepsi had done something unprecedented. It had used Coca-Cola's own product against it in public and made the dominant brand look vulnerable. Did you know? The Pepsi Challenge was the inspiration for one of the most studied phenomena in neuroscience. Brain imaging studies showed that when people knew they were drinking Coca-Cola, activity in the areas of the brain associated with cultural memory and identity increased, regardless of which they actually preferred blind. The brand itself changed the experience of the taste. Coca-Cola's response was slow, then panicked. The company conducted its own taste tests in secret, and the results confirmed what they had feared. In blind tests, people genuinely did prefer Pepsi's slightly sweeter formula. This realization led directly to the decision that would become the greatest corporate blunder of the 20th century. By the early 1980s, Pepsi had pulled almost level with Coca-Cola in supermarket sales. The gap that had once seemed unassailable was shrinking. Coca-Cola's leadership was alarmed. The company's new chief executive, Roberto Goizueta, a Cuban-born chemist who had escaped Castro's revolution, was not a man who accepted defeat quietly. He commissioned extensive research, developed a new, sweeter formula that consistently outperformed both Pepsi and Old Coke in taste tests, and made a decision that his colleagues would later describe as either the bravest or the most reckless in the company's history. He would replace Coca-Cola entirely. New formula, new taste, new era. New Coke launched on the 23rd of April, 1985. Within 24 hours, the backlash had begun. The company's consumer hotline received 1,500 calls on the first day. Within weeks, it was receiving 8,000 calls per day. People were not just complaining, they were devastated. They were furious. One caller told Coca-Cola, "You have taken away my childhood." Another said it was like hearing that a family member had died. In Atlanta, Coca-Cola's home city, a man named Gay Mullings founded a group called Old Cola Drinkers of America. He organized protests, he threatened lawsuits, he gave interviews to every television station that would have him. Did you know? Coca-Cola had conducted approximately 200,000 taste tests before launching New Coke, one of the largest product research efforts in history. None of the tests had asked people how they would feel if the old formula was discontinued. The research measured taste. It had not measured love. There were people who stockpiled the old Coca-Cola. Cases were bought and stored in garages, in basements, in spare rooms. In some parts of the American South, Old Coke was being resold at a significant premium, like a black market for a beloved friend. Pepsi, watching all of this with barely concealed delight, declared victory. The company gave its employees a day off to celebrate. Its chief executive appeared on television to say that Coca-Cola had blinked. On the 11th of July 1985, 79 days after New Coke had launched, Coca-Cola held a press conference. The company announced that the original formula was returning under the name Coca-Cola Classic. The press conference was broadcast live on television. People cried. A senator from Florida called it a meaningful moment for America. Some people have wondered over the years whether it was all planned, whether Coca-Cola had deliberately generated the controversy to remind people how much they loved the original. Coca-Cola has always denied this. Given the genuine anguish inside the company during those 79 days, most historians believe the denial. But whether accidental or not, the result was the same. Coca-Cola had reminded the world that it was not just a drink, it was a piece of who they were. If the 1970s belonged to Pepsi Challenge, the 1980s belonged to something else entirely, the celebrity endorsement arms race. It began with Pepsi. In 1983, the company signed Michael Jackson, at the peak of his Thriller fame, the most famous entertainer on Earth, to appear in 2 television commercials. The deal was worth $5 million, the largest celebrity endorsement contract in history at that time. The commercials were events. People watched them not as advertising, but as entertainment. The second commercial, in which Michael Jackson's hair caught fire during filming from a pyrotechnics malfunction, became one of the most talked about incidents in advertising history. Jackson was injured, Pepsi paid a settlement, and the commercials still ran. Did you know? The incident in which Michael Jackson's hair caught fire during the filming of a Pepsi commercial in 1984 is documented as a significant moment in his life. The pain medication he was given for the burns on his scalp is believed to have contributed to the prescription drug dependency that would affect him for the rest of his life. Coca-Cola responded with its own celebrity strategy, but it was Pepsi that consistently won the pop culture battle through the 80s and 90s. Madonna, Tina Turner, David Bowie, Michael J. Fox, Ray Charles, whose "You Got the Right One, Baby" campaign became one of the most beloved advertising sequences of the era. And then, in 1902, Pepsi signed Britney Spears, and then Beyoncé, and Coca-Cola signed, among many others, Taylor Swift. The battle for the faces and voices of popular culture would continue for decades, billions of dollars flowing from corporate accounts to talent agencies, the two companies bidding against each other for the right to associate their brand with whoever the world was watching that year. Through the 1970s and 80s, as the Cola Wars raged across America, both companies began to understand something important. The real prize was not the American market. The real prize was the world. Coca-Cola had a head start. During the Second World War, General Dwight Eisenhower had sent a telegram to the Coca-Cola Company requesting that they establish bottling plants near the front lines so that American soldiers could have access to Coke wherever they were fighting. The company built 64 bottling plants in war zones around the world. When the war ended, those plants remained. Coca-Cola had, more or less accidentally, built an international distribution network on the back of the Allied victory. Did you know? During World War II, Coca-Cola's president declared that every American soldier, wherever they were in the world, should be able to buy a bottle of Coke for 5 cents, the same price as at home. The U.S. government classified Coca-Cola as an essential wartime commodity, exempting it from sugar rationing. By the 1960s, Coca-Cola was available in more countries than the United Nations had members. It was, in a very real sense, the first truly global consumer product. Pepsi found a different route into international markets. In 1959, at the American National Exhibition in Moscow, a rare moment of cultural exchange during the Cold War, Pepsi's president, Donald Kendall, arranged for the Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev to be photographed drinking a Pepsi. The image went around the world. Pepsi had penetrated the Iron Curtain. For many years, Pepsi was the only American consumer product officially sold in the Soviet Union. The arrangement was unusual, even by Cold War standards. Because the Soviet ruble was not freely convertible into dollars, the company accepted a barter arrangement. In exchange for the right to sell Pepsi in the USSR, the company received the rights to import and sell Stolishmaya vodka in the United States. This arrangement continued until 1989, when the Soviet Union, unable to produce enough vodka to keep pace with Pepsi's growth, offered a different form of payment. 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer from the Soviet naval fleet. Pepsi briefly became the owner of the 6th largest navy in the world. Did you know? Pepsi's president at the time joked to the U.S. National Security Advisor that he was disarming the Soviet Union faster than the U.S. government. The submarines were sold for scrap. By the 1990s, both Coca-Cola and Pepsi had come to understand something that would reshape both companies completely. The carbonated soft drink market, the core of everything both companies had been built on, was beginning to slow. Americans were drinking less soda. Health concerns, shifting tastes, and the rise of bottled water, energy drinks, and juices were eating into the market that Coke and Pepsi had dominated for a century. Both companies made the same response. They would no longer be cola companies. They would be beverage companies, total beverage companies. Pepsi moved first and most aggressively into food. The company had acquired Frito-Lay, the snack food giant, in 1965. By the 90s, it was building an empire that included Doritos, Lay's crisps, Quaker Oats, Tropicana orange juice, Gatorade, Lipton tea, and dozens of other brands. Today, PepsiCo generates roughly half its revenue from food products, not beverages. Coca-Cola stayed closer to drinks. The company acquired Minute Maid orange juice, Dasani water, Powerade sports drinks, Honest tea, Costa coffee, and invested in Monster Energy. It partnered with Nestle on ready-to-drink teas and coffees. The cola itself, the original product that both companies were built on, became just one item in a vast portfolio. The cola wars, in a sense, had been superseded by something larger, a war for total dominance of everything humans drink. Did you know? Today, Coca-Cola's portfolio includes more than 500 brands and approximately 3,900 beverage products sold in over 200 countries. If you drink a different Coca-Cola product every day, it would take more than 10 years to try them all. Let us pause for a moment and consider the scale of what these two companies represent. The numbers are, in the truest sense, staggering. Every single day, approximately 2 billion servings of Coca-Cola products are consumed around the world. 2 billion. Every day. That is roughly one serving for every 4 people on the planet every 24 hours, without pause. The Coca-Cola logo is recognized by an estimated 94% of the world's population. The only symbol more universally recognized is the Olympic rings. Pepsi's global reach is not far behind. PepsiCo is the second largest food and beverage company in the world by revenue, employing more than 300,000 people across the globe. The Coca-Cola formula, that original syrup stirred in John Pemberton's backyard kettle in Atlanta in 1886, has, in the 140 years since, generated more wealth than almost any other single product idea in human history. Pemberton sold it for $2,000. Today, the Coca-Cola brand alone, not the company, just the value of the name, is estimated to be worth approximately $80 billion. Did you know? In 1919, Coca-Cola was sold by the Candler family for $25 million, the largest transaction in the history of the American South at that time. The buyers floated the company on the stock market the same year. One share bought at $40 in 1919 and held through every split and dividend reinvestment to the present day would be worth several $1 million today. The story of Coca-Cola and Pepsi is, on the surface, a story about 2 fizzy drinks. But it is really a story about something much larger. It is a story about how brands work, how identity works, how the things we buy become part of who we are, not because of their physical properties, their taste, their ingredients, but because of the stories that surround them, the associations, the memories, the feeling they give us of belonging to something. The Pepsi challenge proved that people preferred Pepsi in a blind test, and yet Coca-Cola has remained the world's most consumed soft drink for most of its history. How is that possible? Because drinking is not purely a physical act. Drinking Coca-Cola is drinking something that your parents drank, something that has been at every birthday party, every holiday, every moment of celebration in your life. Something that was there when you were happy, something that soldiers drank in the Second World War, that Santa Claus advertised at Christmas, that was handed out free on street corners during the Great Depression. You are not drinking a liquid, you are drinking a century of memory. Pepsi understood this too, eventually. The Pepsi Generation campaign was an attempt to create that same sense of belonging, to make young people feel that Pepsi was their drink, their era, their identity. And for a generation, it worked. The Cola Wars also taught the business world something about competition itself. The two companies needed each other. Without Pepsi pushing, Coca-Cola might never have innovated as aggressively. Without Coca-Cola's dominance to fight against, Pepsi might never have developed its genius for underdog marketing. Each company made the other better, and both became larger and more powerful than either could have been alone. Did you know? In 1975, the CEO of Coca-Cola reportedly said that the best thing that ever happened to Coca-Cola was Pepsi-Cola. Competition had forced the company to be better in every dimension: distribution, marketing, product development, and customer service than it ever would have been with a clear field. There is a lesson in that for anyone who has ever faced competition and felt only threatened by it. As we approach the present day, the Cola Wars have not ended. They have simply changed shape. The battlefield is no longer primarily the American suburb or the Soviet Union. It is the developing world: India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, where hundreds of millions of people are entering the middle class and choosing for the first time which brands will define their lives. It is the health-conscious consumer, the person who wants something that feels good to drink without the guilt of sugar or artificial ingredients, a market that neither company has yet won convincingly. It is the digital space, social media, streaming platforms, influencer culture, where brand loyalty is built not through television commercials, but through 1,000 smaller, more personal interactions. And it is the sustainability battlefield, where both companies face increasing pressure over plastic waste, water use in drought-prone regions, and the health consequences of their core products in populations dealing with obesity and diabetes at unprecedented rates. The companies that began as a pharmacist's kitchen experiment and a candy store owner's grievance have become something almost too large to comprehend. Two organisms so embedded in the fabric of global commerce and culture that it is difficult to imagine the world without them. And yet, the world got along perfectly well for hundreds of thousands of years without either. It is only in the last 140 years, barely a blink in human history, that two brown, fizzy drinks became part of the furniture of civilization, which is, when you stop to think about it, rather extraordinary. There is something else worth knowing about these two drinks, something that goes beyond marketing and history and into human biology. Both drinks are designed in a precise scientific sense to be difficult to stop drinking. Sugar triggers the release of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, the brain's tiredness signals, creating alertness and a sense of well-being. Carbonation activates receptors in the mouth in a way the brain interprets as refreshment and excitement. Cold temperature amplifies all of these effects simultaneously. A cold Coca-Cola or Pepsi on a hot day is giving your brain several pleasure signals at once. The combination is not accidental. Coca-Cola's recipe was refined over decades to maximize this response. The exact ratio of sweetness to acidity, the precise carbonation level, the flavor compounds that create the strongest response without becoming overwhelming. Did you know? Research shows the optimal drinking temperature for cola is between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, carbonation is maximally retained, sweetness is not excessive, and the refreshment response in the brain is strongest. Both companies include precise temperature requirements in their distribution and retail contracts worldwide. Caleb Bradham, who put pepsin into his original formula because he believed it aided digestion, would probably be astonished to learn that his drink would one day be the subject of neuroscience research and brain imaging studies. But then, John Pemberton would be equally astonished by almost everything that followed from his brass kettle. In 1915, Coca-Cola faced a serious problem. Dozens of imitators had appeared, drinks with similar names and labels being passed off as the real thing in less reputable establishments. The company needed a bottle that could not be confused with anything else. A bottle recognizable even in complete darkness, even broken into fragments, even glimpsed for only a second on a shelf. They ran a design competition. The winner was a glassworks in Terre Haute, Indiana. Their designer, Earl Dean, was inspired by a misidentification. He looked up Coca in an encyclopedia and found an illustration of a cocoa pod instead. The curved, ribbed shape of the cocoa pod became the basis for what the world would call the contour bottle. Patented in 1915, in production by 1916, and within a decade, one of the most recognized shapes on Earth. Did you know? The Coca-Cola contour bottle is one of only 2 product packages ever granted trademark status in the United States based on shape alone, meaning the silhouette, with no label or text, is legally protected. Andy Warhol featured it in his famous prints, saying what he loved about Coca-Cola was that the President of the United States drank the same Coke as the poorest person in America. No premium version, no better Coke for better people. Earl Dean had been looking for one thing, found another, and created something that would outlast both his lifetime and the century he lived in. A solution to a commercial problem that became, almost accidentally, a work of art. Let us end where we began, with a broader thought about what these 2 companies represent. There is almost no country in the world where you cannot buy a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi. A few places have been exceptions historically, parts of North Korea, parts of Cuba. Everywhere else on Earth, at almost any moment, a person can choose between 2 products that trace their origins to a pharmacist's backyard in Atlanta and a drugstore in New Bern, North Carolina. That is a remarkable thing, not because fizzy drinks are remarkable in themselves, but because it represents something important about how the modern world was made. It was made by people with ideas, some brilliant, some terrible, some stumbled upon by accident, and some refined over decades. It was made by stories, the stories companies told about themselves, that gradually became part of the culture that produced them. It was made by real wars, the Civil War that left Pemberton wounded and searching, the Second World War that gave Coca-Cola a global network, the Cold War that gave Pepsi its foothold in the Soviet Union. And it was made by ordinary people making ordinary choices, reaching into a refrigerator, ordering at a counter, picking up a can or a bottle, millions of times a day, every day, for 140 years. Those accumulated choices built something extraordinary. 2 brown fizzy drinks and everything they carried with them. There is one last fact I want to leave you with tonight, one that I think captures something essential about this whole story. In 2011, a small bottle was found in a wall cavity during renovations of a pharmacy in Hartwell, Georgia. Inside the bottle was a formula, handwritten on aged paper with the heading Merchandise 7X. The local newspaper published it. Historians and food scientists examined it. Coca-Cola said it was interesting, but not the real formula. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. The company has never confirmed or denied definitively. What struck me about the story was not whether the formula was genuine, it was the image of it, a small handwritten note tucked inside a wall, surviving more than a century. The origin of something that would be tasted by billions of people on every continent in every decade since. John Pemberton stirred something in a kettle in his backyard. He was a wounded man looking for relief, trying to help others who were suffering. He died broke and in pain, never knowing what he had made. And what he made is still here. Changed, distributed, marketed, fought over, protected, and sold 2 billion times a day. Tonight, you have listened to the story of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, a pharmacist in a backyard, a blind taste test in a shopping mall, a navy of Soviet submarines, a Santa Claus painted from a mirror, a formula hidden in a wall for a century. Your English has been listening even as your mind has been resting. The words have been settling quietly, finding their places, making themselves at home. That is what language does, given time and space and patience. Sleep well. Good night.